Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me is David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, brother.
And joining us now is Dwayne Monroe at Cloud Conquistador. Dwayne is a writer on many things, cybernetics, but this time we're going to be talking to him about AI and a materialist approach. You can follow his work over at Monroe Lab, where the tagline is AI industry analysis without hype or tech broism. Dwayne, welcome to the show. And if you want to introduce anything more, or like let people know about your book, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt and David. Thanks for having me on the show. It's awesome to be here. So I'm, I guess you could say, by trade a technologist, which means I work with these stupid computer systems that vex us so much. I have been doing this work for like 25 years, actually. So I am a veteran, a venerable, as you might say, an old dude, though I have this lovely smooth skin. And the website is monroelab.net. And I am indeed writing a book, which the working title is Attack Mannequins, which is an analysis of the AI industry, not AI as a technology. And the thesis is that the way that the idea of AI is deployed by capitalism is as an anti-worker project. And in order to make it an effective anti-worker project, there has to be a corresponding propaganda.
Right. Now, before we get into that, I want to just let people know we're having this conversation a few days after Silicon Valley Bank had a run, which is very interesting. Is there anything about that context that you think is relevant to this conversation now?
It's still relatively early days on that. It's an unfolding situation. And I am indeed tracking it. I just posted something about that on Twitter, as it happens. What we know thus far, at least based upon what I have read in the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and what I've been able to gather from tweets coming from techies in the Valley who I follow and who follow me, is that the bank, the leadership of the bank made some technical errors as regards investment portfolio. However, the bank itself was probably solvent, but there has been a run based upon a lack of confidence. And what this has revealed is the concentration of banking in the sector into one institution, which is quite interesting. And so I think something like between 85 and 90 or upwards of over 90% of so-called, VC funds and startup activity is financially has flowed through the Silicon Valley Bank. So obviously there's a rather significant impact being felt. And I've noted three different responses from the people I track. One is a pragmatic response, which is that obviously the accounts of normal people or individuals and small to mid-sized organizations, companies, startups as they're called, should be secured, pragmatically speaking, because the fear is that if other businesses in that same category, it could be an HVAC business in Texas, for example, if they don't have confidence at their local bank that the FDIC will backstop them, that could also cause runs. And then the siphoning of funds away to larger banks, JP Morgan Chase and larger retail banks. The second response has been, okay, the hell with you. You guys just burn in hell. I think the third response has been from VCs who are yelling about, my God, the age of innovation is coming to an end.
Yeah.
Which that is the most dubious response of all.
Yeah, okay, that's so. I've sort of thought of AI itself as like the new crypto, and when I say that, like, I also will grant, like, well, there's a little bit more application to AI than I've seen from crypto. Like, crypto is interesting to me for like basketball cards, and really like not a whole like NFTs. Like that's the only like NFT I ever wanted was like a rookie basketball card. Is it the conventional wisdom about AI that there is something more there relative to AI, but it's also boosted for the same sort of basic investor reasons? Is that accurate?
I think it is, because the technology of pattern matching, which is really what we're talking about, obviously has many applications. Even in a socialist society, like any large scale society, there obviously would be a need to gather data, analyze that data, and find patterns within it, to do stat analysis, right? So the potential, unlike crypto, which has no purpose or other than to be a Ponzi scheme, there is potential in algorithmic pattern matching. I won't even use the term AI because it's a marketing term.
Right.
But that potential, of course, is not being realized because what the organizations that actually own it at this point at a large scale, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, what they are doing is diverting all the effort, all the talent, all the hardware into activities that benefit them and not benefit, say, the wider goals of a society.
Yeah, I mean, could you just help our audience understand a little bit about like this, like Chat GPT system, you know, and like, because you know, you're using the term like pattern recognition. I think that that's like really important to understand, like what it is actually capable of doing. You know, so when you're giving that a query, you know, what is that process like actually like, you know, like in like layman's terms?
So at a very high level, what is occurring is that the system takes in a corpus of text, has taken in as part of its so-called training program or regimen, a corpus of text. But you know, unlike say Siri, which has done the same, a large language model, and that's the name for the category of system that ChatGPT and its predecessor GPT-3 and other systems in that category. What they are, they're called large language models, and they take in vast amounts of text from the internet and primarily other sources. And then when we write, of course, there are grammatical rules to our writing. Therefore, you can find patterns. So what the programs do is they vectorize, that is to say, they create abstract tokens of what words are. So if I say cow to you, well, we're humans, we visualize an animal. But to software, cow can simply be turned into a token. It can turned into a symbol that can then be found as a pattern over and over and over again. And then you can find other words like, you know, the cow is drinking water, for example. Well, that's a pattern that can be found as part of the grammatical rules of the sentences that we speak. Now, if you have the clever mathematicians, which OpenAI does, to be able to manipulate these patterns, then what you can do is produce a method of processing that then, when the system is prompted, can produce plausible text as output, because the plausibility of the text is because it's following rules. It's not dissimilar from what, say, chess playing programs might do, at least at a very high level, because chess has rules. It's a bounded game, right? And so it is possible to have software to step through the rules of the game and therefore respond, because of its, you know, fast processing power, respond rapidly to the rules of the game to find a response. In a way, this is what ChatGPT is also doing, only this time the game is creating plausible text as output. We read something, and because we are thinking beings, it's plausible to us. We are actually the ones who are imbuing it with meaning. The system itself does not have the capacity to imbue it with meaning. It is simply doing, you know, this, as I say, elaborate pattern matching that's based upon the fact that Microsoft, in its investment with OpenAI, built a supercomputer. So it has a vast amount of processing power to enable it to actually perform these elaborate feats.
And, so, you know, there's a lot of like VC people using this. And like you mentioned, the anti-worker element of be like, look out, knowledge workers, this is coming after you. And like, I'm curious what because I've always been a little bit skeptical of that. On the one hand, I could understand like maybe this would be actually like a graphing calculator for students, and it sort of like creates a skeleton of a paper, and then they have to. But to me, it's like they're gonna have to go in and imbue that with meaning, and like you say, like add actual like they're not and I think that should be apparent to a professor. Like, is that your attitude towards this thing? Because I always found it strange that this thing, it can't seem to cite its sources. Like, that's pretty unhelpful to me if I'm trying to use it to do anything that I should have confidence in, because you're going to need to check that as a human being.
That's right. And it's not as if this is not possible. Let me give you my favorite fictional example of how this might be done, which is Star Trek. Mm-hmm. In Star Trek, when you have a character interacting with the ship's computer, what are they doing? They're saying a query. There's an episode of Next Generation Star Trek, which is the one I grew up on, in which Jodie LaForge, the ship is trapped in a situation, and they have to actually kind of engineer a new understanding of physics in order to get out of the situation. And so LaForge is interacting audibly with the computer. And what he is saying to the computer is, find me papers dating back however far that do research into the following things about motion, like the motion within the subspace continuum, blah, blah, blah. Now that's an interesting model, fictional model of what we should have what we should be working towards. Mm-hmm. Because what the computer in that fictional scenario is doing is it's reviewing documents that people have created, sifting it, and then finding for LaForge things that meet his criteria that is useful to him. Well, we can imagine taking that from fiction and applying it to real life, COVID and various other things that we deal with. One of the examples I give is what if this computation was used to help us understand the local effects of climate change on different regions? Like, what if there's computational power available to Brownsville, Texas, and to Philadelphia, and to Amsterdam, where I am, and so forth and so on. Now, to answer your question, one of the reasons why there's so much concern about the use of this text in schooling and writing is because under our current system, in which the primary purpose is not really to educate you, but to just kind of get you through the system to get to work, right, the standards of writing are not quite high, right? Because it would be very easy to just have a writing assignment that would be impossible for ChatGPT to match. If I were to say to a student, if I was a professor or a teacher, and I said to a student, write a description of your house, well, ChatGPT could not do that. It has no access. It has no access to data outside of its training set, of the data set that, as we mentioned earlier, with which it was initially set up. And that's why it's unable to do these lookups that are dynamic, because there's a set of data, billions of parameters. It's quite large. Even so, it's not dynamic. It's not just, say, going out to the internet, doing a search, as the fictional Star Trek ship computers doing a search of papers actively and then returning results. It's finding from its corpus, from its body of data that's stored within its database, what seems relevant to produce the plausible text. But beyond that, it's not doing anything beyond that. And the reason it's not, to get to the main point, is that there's no profit in that for the companies that own it. Because, again, that is possible, but it would take an interesting research program, and the goal of it would not be creating something to challenge labor. It would be to create something that would enhance labor, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Could I mean, just to be like really clear about how these things are working, because you're making, I think, a really important point that, like, I think for a lot of people who aren't like very familiar with these systems, their response might be like, well, this is just early baby steps of this technology. Eventually we'll be able to develop our way out of like this problem. But I think the point about the fact that these systems like don't understand what it is that they're producing sort of creates a pretty significant limit on what it could end up being, even as the technology or the programs become more advanced, right?
That's right. Yeah, and the example that I give two examples to people. One is the ladder example, that is a ladder as in a step ladder. No matter how high you could build your ladder, you could never reach the moon, because a ladder is not the methodology through which you would reach the moon, right? So I'm not saying that it's impossible that humanity at some point in its future, should we have one, and God's willing we do, I'm not saying that it's absolutely impossible to produce a genuinely thinking machine. However, that would be the work of generations, if not centuries. It is not something that would be done in 50 years. because the methods that are being employed today, which is instruction set based digital computation, cannot do that. And we see this in the amount of hardware that is required to even do what ChatGPT does. In other words, to reach or to accomplish the feats that they do today that are impressive, but still pointillistic, narrow.
Yeah.
It requires thousands upon thousands upon thousands of computational elements, and Microsoft and OpenAI aren't even telling us how much cooling, how much power. So in order to reach sentience, let's even play devil's advocate and say, well, maybe you can just do scale, as some say that scale is all you need. Let's say scale is all you need. Well, do you need 10 million computers?
Yeah.
Do you need the entire Atlantic Ocean to cool it? I mean, obviously, there's a point at which, even if that method was the path forward, there's a limit. There's a natural limit, which is what the tech industry doesn't understand or acknowledge. But I would say that more fundamentally, it's just not the way to actually get there.
Yeah, and like I just can't get over how you still need, you know, the worker and the person there. Like with the example that I found kind of mildly interesting was somebody asked it for a list of pathologies of the intellectual dark web, and one of the responses was, you know, they have dabbled in sort of race science, and I think that's accurate. But like, if you don't know the history, you can make that claim, and then you don't know anything to back it up. What use is that really? Like, you haven't really gotten anywhere. You've been sort of empowered by a machine to make an assertion that you can't back up, which is like all the entirety of this sort of essay writing sort of freak out too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and if professors, if pedagogy in general demanded more, and I'm not saying this to put a knock on students. I'm saying this to put a knock on pedagogy under capitalism, but more specifically under neoliberal capitalism, in which quality of education becomes less and less important. Not because machines can do all the work, but because, you know, it's such a, how do I put this, chaotic system that any kind of long-term planning is just it's anathema, you know, to the neoliberal way of thinking. And in an earlier phase of capitalism, obviously, although there were fights, public school education was understood to be essential because you're building railroads, you're doing all these things, you need engineers. We still need these people, but the capitalist elites that we have today, well, they're not J.P. Morgan. I mean, so we're talking about, not that he was a hero, but he had more of a knowledge of political economy than, say, a Musk.
Well, you know, so I mean, I was wanting to talk a little bit about like the actual like real uses of this technology, both in like application, but also I think ideologically, because like, you know, I think one point that I think has been really well made by somebody like Aaron Beninoff, who's written about like work and like how technology is sort of like fetishized. Like in America, there's like this understanding of what happened in the 70s and 80s is that like automation and technology took everyone's job. It's like, no, it was like capitalism making a decision to outsource much of the work. And in fact, you know, automation was less of a factor than the fact that really great, you know, for capitalists, like cheap labor sources became available to them.
I think he's the only one, to my knowledge, he is the only scholar making this point.
Yeah.
Because most others do indeed believe that there's just all these robots. I don't know what they're doing. Just taking all these jobs.
No, and I mean, I think it's really important because it's great for capitalists to basically say like technology, right? Which is like, you know, you just imagine what that is, right? It's not like, you know, in a lot of ways, it's not a material force. It's almost like a spiritual force,
right?
For people. But capital is like investing significant money into this technology. Microsoft is one that, like, when you see that kind of allocation to capital, you should be wondering what they're up to, because, you know,
$10 billion. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, could you talk about, you know, what your feelings are on, you know, on that move, and also maybe for folks who might not be as familiar, why like Microsoft in particular getting involved in this is different from, I don't know, some of the other big tech companies, because Microsoft, I feel like, can be a little bit more rooted of a tech corporation than some of the other ones.
Yes, and the reason is because Microsoft, and I know this from personal and direct experience. I've worked with Microsoft Technologies and with Microsoft as a business, negotiated with Microsoft and Fortune 500s and so forth. So I have a pretty good idea of how they operate. And when I heard about the $10 billion investment, in OpenAI, the first thought that hit me was they are going to take what is today a scattered effort and they will gather it together and they will operationalize it in a way that other organizations have failed to do so far. And we see this in the integration of OpenAI's systems, ChatGPT, DALL-E, with the Azure cloud platform. We see this in fact, Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, is going to be participating in leading a symposium, or I guess an event. A symposium sounds grand. It's a corporate event. He's not Plato. It's got an event in which they're presenting the future of AI. And what this means is that Microsoft is going to market this as a solution to business problems. And they're demonstrating this internally by inserting ChatGPT, for example, and DALL-E into their own product line, into Teams and to Office 365 or Microsoft 365. And these are systems that corporations use every single day. Globally, like for example, here in the Netherlands where I am, I think Microsoft has 70% of the corporate market. Even today, I mean, we hear about Amazon all the time, but people do not understand that at Microsoft's integration with powerful corporations at a very deep level, and so that changes things dramatically, I'd say, because all of the harms that we're concerned about when it comes to the proliferation of these algorithmic systems, particularly inappropriately in decision-making flows like in government and business, these harms will accelerate because Microsoft has the ability to, as I said, operationalize this on a global scale.
And Dwayne, can you just talk a little bit broadly about your materialist approach for any like tech bros who may have come across this that are trying to study up a little bit? I read Monroe Lab, and you talk about the shift from the idealist to the materialist. Like I went to NYU to study technology and society as a master's student, and that was, I think, at least for me, it was about a shift at a point where people were starting to get a little bit more critical and a little bit less utopian. And then starting to think about, okay, actually, what is the structure of these systems that are dazzling us at these conferences?
Basically, what it means is always think about the computers, always think about the data centers, always think about the supply chains, the water, the power, the workers. As long as you do that, whether you understand the technology or not, if you remember that we're talking about machines, and that the machines have to be made from raw materials and processed and shipped and put in boxes, and there's procurement people and there's people signing, transferring funds and all of these things, then you have a foundation, a solid foundation for them beginning to interrogate the software that is being presented to us as if it's magic, because it doesn't exist but for this hardware. And so that's the material basis for it. And the software itself, although it's electronically operated, and so it seems ethereal, it is not, because we're talking about, as I said, instruction sets, more advanced or more sophisticated versions of what was done for looms in the 17th century. If you could take Ava Lovelace or Charles Babbage and give them an updated course on what was happening, and I'm sure they would understand, because the rules have not really changed that much. And so by rejecting claims that cannot be confirmed, like when the tech industry says, we will have self-driving cars, well then, the question to ask from a material perspective is how? Tell me how. And if the answer gets more and more abstract, if greater and greater claims or more expansive claims are made about how computers will be able to do this and do that, how? And what will be required? How much power will be required? What size? How much energy is required? Where's all this coming from? And who are the workers? If you always ask these questions, then you are, I'd say, on the road to being well defended or inoculated against hype.
Yeah. Dwayne, have you heard of the digesting duck?
Wasn't that a mechanical duck that was constructed like in the 18th century or so?
Yeah,
In Pelican?
1700s. Yeah, so I'll just
Yeah.
read this is for folks. It's mentioned in Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon, which is where I had a bit. But the canard digerateur, or digesting duck, was an automaton in the form of a duck created by Jacques de Vaucanson, who's the guy who created the lathe, or a certain type of lathe, I guess. And unveiled in 1739 in France, the mechanical duck appeared to have the ability to eat kernels of grain and metabolize and defecate them. While the duck did not actually have the ability to do this, the food was collected in one inner container and pre-stored feces was produced from a second, so that no digestion took place. Vaucanson hoped that a truly digesting automaton could one day be designed. And I just feel like okay, there's maybe more application to Chat GPT, but a similar sort of like bamboozlement is happening that everyone's
that's
getting.
Precisely right.
Yeah.
Although I didn't recall that there was pre-staged.
Yeah, that's I guess there's not quite.
Right?
That's a whole other level.
Yeah.
Of commitment to the bit.
And one final thing, that think material will prevent you from going off of the deep end of the AI is going to take us over, and one day they'll be able to like self-replicate soon.
Exactly.
And put us against the wall, basically like the Nick Bostrom hypothesis. That's pretty far-fetched at this point, right?
It is far-fetched. It's not even science fiction. It's a pure fantasy. And Bostrom's I'm convinced that Bostrom doesn't know anything about computers, because everything he says is so completely unmoored from the actual operation of the machinery that I get the impression that he's just like sitting in a room, quite literally an armchair, just saying, well, this is what will happen and that's what will happen.
Wouldn't it be scary?
Release. Yeah, and wouldn't that be frightening? And then people respond to that. And this is, I started all this because I watched a left podcast a couple of years ago, and someone made a statement that self-driving trucks were coming, and that this was going to affect the political economy of truckers. And one of the other guests, who was a trucker, said, no, there's no way. And as I recall, she even said, I don't know anything about computers, but what I do know is that what I do, the environments that I operate in, the things that I do have to be beyond computers. And her intuition is correct, because the dynamism of driving in a variety of circumstances, in a variety of weather conditions, and responding to all sorts of things is now, and to my knowledge will for a very long time and perhaps forever be beyond computational systems. Certainly the kinds of systems that we are building today and are likely to build. And if we were to begin a research program that might lead to thinking systems, it cannot be done under capitalism. I'm convinced of this because the low-hanging fruit is digital, and because that's what confers the command and control power. Cybernetics, like the original practice of cybernetics, as espoused by, say, Stafford Beer, who some lefties may know of Cybersyn fame in Chile, and other cyberneticians, dreamed of a way of looking at systems and looking at feedback loops and so forth, and studying nature to find patterns, to build systems that could be dynamic and allow us to navigate complexity. That's like the idea. Well, if we're doing that, then obviously, as we're navigating, we would think that, well, our entire world is nonsense. And so the entire system that has been built up, for us, or not for us, but that we have found ourselves having to deal with, is nonsense. And this is why I think that the type of computational research that might lead us to more exciting types of systems is really not in the cards, so long as we are dominated by the tech industry.
Well, Dwayne Monroe at Cloud Keystone. Dave, did you want to say something there?
No, that's fine.
You can find him at Monroe Lab and at Cloud Keystone. Like I said, Dwayne, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.